You've probably heard the story 100 times. An American soldier fires his last round. The clip ejects with that famous ping, and a German soldier hears it, rushes forward, and kills him while he's reloading. It's one of the most repeated facts about World War II. It shows up in video games, movies, documentaries, and Reddit threads. There's just one problem. It almost certainly never happened. And that's not the only lie you've been told about the M1 Garand. So, where did this story actually come from? Because it had to start somewhere. The earliest known source is a 1948 book called Ordnance Went Up Front by a civilian gunsmith named Roy Dunlap. He wrote that on Guadalcanal, the ping sound told Japanese soldiers when a Garand was empty, and they would rush forward and kill the rifleman. But here's what Dunlap conveniently left out. He wasn't there. This was second-hand information passed along like a wartime rumor, and despite decades of research, military historians have never found a single documented case of this actually happening. Not one. No after-action reports, no soldier testimonies, no official records. But wait, it gets better. Because we actually have survey data from soldiers who used the Garand in combat. And what they said completely flips this myth on its head. In 1952, the Army's Operations Research Office surveyed 315 combat veterans who had actually used the M1 Garand in Korea. They asked them directly about that ping. 59% said the ping was actually useful to them as a signal to reload. 27% thought it might possibly help the enemy, and 14% said it didn't matter at all. Think about that. The majority of soldiers who actually used this rifle in combat thought the ping was helpful, not deadly. And here's why the physics make this myth ridiculous. A .30-06 round, which is what the Garand fires, produces around 160 decibels. That's well above the 140 decibel threshold for instant hearing damage. One combat veteran described a firefight like this. A small unit shootout sounds like a winter 50-car pileup on the interstate that just goes on and on. Nobody can hear a low-volume ping in that chaos. German veterans who were interviewed after the war found the whole idea laughable. They said even if they could hear a single rifle's ping, they'd be too worried about the rest of the American squad to rush one guy who's reloading. So the ping myth? Completely busted. But now let's talk about a criticism of the Garand that actually has some truth to it. You'll hear people say the M1 Garand jammed constantly, that it couldn't handle mud or sand, that it was a maintenance nightmare compared to the German Mauser. And unlike the ping myth, this one has a kernel of truth. But the full story is more interesting than a simple reliable or unreliable verdict. In 1950, the Army ran dust and sand trials at Aberdeen Proving Ground. Both M1 control rifles, and I'm quoting here, shut down quickly and totally when exposed to debris. The open-top receiver design, which allows for that fast end-block clip loading, also lets dirt and sand fall right into the action. That's a real vulnerability, not a myth. But here's where the story gets more complicated. S.L.A. Marshall, the famous military historian, compiled a report called Commentary on Infantry Operations and Weapons Usage in Korea, and he found something interesting. Of all the weapons carried by American infantry, the M1 Garand was the least sensitive to heavy frost, extreme cold, and icing. The same report absolutely trashed the M1 carbine, calling it more sensitive to frost than any other weapon in the Army's arsenal. So the Garand struggled with sand and dust, but excelled in freezing conditions. The bolt-action Mauser was the opposite. It was simpler and more dirt-resistant, but that simplicity came at a massive cost. The Garand could put out 40 to 50 aimed rounds per minute. The Mauser maxed out around 15. That's a 3-to-1 firepower advantage. At Hill 609 in Tunisia in 1943, German soldiers armed with Mausers engaged American troops at close range, about 20 yards. The engagement ended with the German unit wiped out. The Garand's rate of fire was simply overwhelming in close combat. Japanese troops in the Philippines, despite years of combat experience in China, had never faced anything like it. They genuinely wondered if every American soldier had been issued a machine gun. So was the Garand unreliable? In certain conditions, yes. But that trade-off bought something no other standard-issue rifle in WW2 could match. All right, let's talk about Garand Thumb. This one's fun because, unlike the ping myth, this injury was absolutely real. But the way people talk about it, you'd think the rifle was designed to eat fingers. The injury happens when the bolt slams forward on your thumb while loading. And, yeah, it hurts. One World War II veteran's father called the M1 a thumb-busting son of a bitch. Studies of Korean War medical records suggest around 10% of Garand users experienced some form of this injury. That ranges from a bruise to an actually fractured thumb. But here's what the myth leaves out. Almost every case was preventable with proper technique. If you position the heel of your right hand against the operating rod handle while pressing the clip down, the bolt physically cannot advance. According to experts at Garand Gear, 99% of cases are self-inflicted due to user error. And here's the kicker. The majority of Garand Thumb injuries didn't happen in combat. They happened during drill and inspection, when soldiers got sloppy with their technique under repetitive stress. One veteran described it perfectly. After coming to inspection arms in 3 quick, snappy movements, the rifle gets snatched from your hands by the inspector. Unless you mix up those last 2 movements. Then you get a true M1 thumb. So Garand Thumb was real, painful, and absolutely a rite of passage for WW2 soldiers. But a fatal design flaw? No, it was a training issue that proper technique solved completely. Now here's a myth that even a lot of gun enthusiasts don't know about. The M1 Garand was not originally designed for the .30-06 cartridge it became famous for. John Garand, the Canadian-born engineer who designed the rifle, built it for a smaller, lighter round called the .276 Peterson, and in Army testing, the .276 version won. It was the clear winner. In 1928, the Army's Caliber Board actually determined that .276 or smaller was more effective for wounding at combat ranges. The lighter round meant less recoil, better accuracy, and the rifle could hold 10 rounds instead of 8. But in February 1932, one man killed the .276 Garand, General Douglas MacArthur. The day after the .276 Garand's successful test, MacArthur personally disapproved any caliber change. His reasoning? The Army had massive stockpiles of .30-06 ammunition left over from World War I, and switching calibers during the Depression would be too expensive. He also wanted ammunition commonality between rifles and machine guns, which made logistical sense. Here's the irony, though. Those stockpiled .30-06 rounds that MacArthur was protecting, they were exhausted within about 6 months of actual combat operations. And in 2022, the U.S. Army adopted a new rifle cartridge called the .277 Fury. It's almost the exact same concept as the .276 Peterson that MacArthur killed. We basically went in a circle that took 90 years. But perhaps the saddest part of this story is what happened to John Garand himself. In January 1936, Garand transferred all rights to his inventions to the U.S. government. He never received a single dollar in royalties, despite over 6 million rifles being produced. Congress actually tried to pass a bill awarding him $100,000 in appreciation. It failed. The man who armed America in its greatest war gave everything to his adopted country and got nothing in return. So after everything we've covered, the myths busted and the real, flaws acknowledged, was the M1 Garand actually any good? On January 26, 1945, General George S. Patton sat down and wrote a letter to Major General Levin Campbell, the War Department's Chief of Ordnance. And the opening line of that letter has become the most famous endorsement of any rifle in military history. In my opinion, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised. That quote is real. It's documented. It's not taken out of context. Patton genuinely believed the Garand was the finest infantry weapon ever created, and he wasn't alone. General MacArthur, the same guy who killed the .276 version, reported from Patton in early 1942 that the Garand operated with no mechanical defects and could go a week of constant action without cleaning or lubrication. Lieutenant Colonel Philip Fry of the Philippine Scouts said the Garand's firepower was simply beyond his descriptive powers. The M1 Garand was the only semi-automatic rifle in World War II to successfully become standard issue for a major military. The Soviets tried with the SVT-40. The Germans tried with the G-43. Both remained supplements to bolt-action rifles. Only America pulled it off at scale. So what's the truth about the M1 Garand? The ping never got anyone killed. The reliability issues were real but came with a 3 times firepower advantage that changed infantry combat forever. Garand Thumb was painful but preventable. And the rifle we got wasn't even the one John Garand originally designed. The M1 Garand wasn't perfect. No weapon is. But a Canadian immigrant spent 34 years of his life perfecting this design, gave it to his adopted country without asking for anything in return, and armed the soldiers who liberated Europe and the Pacific. That's worth more than the myths. If you made it this far, you're clearly someone who cares about getting history right. So hit subscribe, because next week we're covering next video topic, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. YouTube thinks you'll like this video right here. Click it.